waka, Aotearoa te tai, moiraki te kāinga, unu ki te marae, kai Tahu me Kahungunu, oku iwi ko Zoe Tipa hau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I quite like it. Every time I come into Zoom, I happen to have the moiraki boulders behind me, which is quite cool because I must have put it on for a presentation sometime, but we usually use Teams, so I don't usually have the magnificent boulders behind me. But that's where my whānau's from, moiraki. My grandfather was the eldest of 17 children, and when I went down to the family home where they were all born on the hearth of the family home next to the marae down there, and on the gate there was Kahungunu written on the gate, and I said to my grandfather, that's a funny thing to have written in the middle of the South Island, and he said that's because his grandmother actually had come down from Kahungunu and married a Tipa down there. So that's my whakapapa, and so I'm currently the chief nurse at Whānau Āwhina Plunkett. I've been involved in sort of child health, whānau health, nursing kind of stuff for a very long time, and worked with Plunkett for about 11 years, and then went away and taught nursing for a while at Wintec and AUT, and then came back to Plunkett about a year and a half ago as the chief nurse, and the reason I came back to Plunkett really was to unashamedly implement the model that I developed in my PhD, and sort of living the dream really, because it's not often that you get to do the research and then get to see it being applied to practice, and so I'm really excited and privileged, I guess, to have that opportunity. So yeah, really nice to be here. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit today about my research and about the process that we're going through at Whānau Āwhina Plunkett to implement it. So I hope you will are able to take something from it. Yeah, and I can see we've got a few people in the room, so I hope you're having a great day, by the way, and I'm sorry I'm not there face to face. So what does it say? That we're being recorded. Okay, that's cool. All right, so just a little bit of background to the study. I've always been really interested in how output measures drive organisations and drive clinical practice in a certain way. So by that I mean how we measure kind of how many times we talk about something. So how many times we talk about postnatal depression, how many times we talk about breastfeeding, and they have been loosely kind of interpreted as outcome measures. And outcomes are ideal to measure, but they're not easy to quantify, and the measurements around outcomes are often subjective and don't fit well with funding models. So funders are often quite, weary, I guess, of funding us in that way. So I guess I saw that, early on in my career that a difficulty really exists with outputs driving practice, and the problem with that is that it creates this kind of polarized, you're either right or you're wrong kind of thing, or you've either done something or you haven't done something, and it can end up with individual preference being overridden or not acknowledged, and that leads to whānau feeling like they've been done to or judged for doing things in a way that doesn't align with what the service says they should be doing. The other thing I was interested about was cultural responsiveness, and this idea of cultural responsiveness and how it connects with cultural safety. And increasingly, there was this kind of, we've looked at the term cultural competence in professions, and healthcare professions in particular. And the problem with cultural competence is that it became quite sort of a tick box approach to, like, you either got cultural competence or you haven't. And it didn't often, it didn't encompass the kind of power, the concept of power that's inherent within cultural safety. So the idea that somebody receiving the service determines whether or not the service was culturally safe or not. When people talk about cultural competence, they often talk about, oh yeah, I'm culturally competent because I took my shoes off at the door, or I asked permission before I did this, or a whole lot of kind of task type things again. Whereas that kind of subjective measurement of whānau sort of experiencing your care as being safe and your services then being safe to approach and use is left out. And cultural responsiveness is really about the environment in which you're able to practice in culturally safe ways. So there's no point asking people to work in a culturally safe way and then put all these systems and structures around them that mean that they can't. So I was interested in exploring that in the Well Child Tamariki order context. And relational practice, just as a bit of an overview of what that is, working in ways that privilege the relationship with whānau, and just that it's generally accepted that without a relationship, the likelihood of us meeting the needs of whānau is really low. So in whānau Awhina Plunkett, we had a time there where we got rid of all of our relational practice training, our dedicated relational practice model, and we implemented a electronic documentation system at the same time. So you can see it was a perfect storm really to kind of move into that really kind of transactional space, and it's time to reclaim the relationships and privilege the relationships again. The other thing of course, just acknowledging that Well Child Tamariki order services are really well positioned for engaging with whānau. See probably 95% of all whānau with new babies, Well Child Tamariki order services across the board, and getting into homes that and I don't know many other services that have that kind of reach. So just that, we have the I guess it's the we have that ability to get into homes that privilege of getting into homes, and we need to take advantage of that and do right by that, I guess. And the other thing I was interested in is when we talk about Māori measures of hauora, and we often substitute the term health for hauora, but actually hauora means something quite different, and it's quite a lot bigger than the term health kind of suggests. So it's about making sure that Māori have this opportunity to construct the way that they want services to meet their needs. And to me, that's about identifying what whānau value and what constitutes hauora within each whānau. And so being able to be a service that responds to that individual preference is really important as well. All right, I'm rambling on. I know I've only got 40 minutes, so I better hurry up. I'm going to just skip through to my research question. So for the PhD research that I did, I was asking, what are the processes involved for working together in a culturally responsive way with Māori whānau accessing Well Child Tamariki order services? So I really wanted to develop this theory for cultural responsiveness that's defined by Māori whānau. So it's not defined by the service. And I use kaupapa Māori methodology and constructivist grounded theory methods. And that was important to do because it was about privileging Māori worldviews within that kind of Western biomedical health service context and developing that model. So those were that's the research question and aims. Anyone that's sort of heard me talk about this, I wrote my methodology chapter 3 times, and it nearly drove me around the bend. But it kind of I could talk to you at length about the methodology, but it was so important to get that right because it was so easy within the framework that we currently do research within to fall into a non-Māori process in looking at the data, which you have to keep taking it back to what you're there for and why you're doing it this way and what's so important about doing it this way. So kaupapa Māori research is really fascinating. There's no handbook to, you don't just pick up a textbook and say, oh yeah, I'm going to do kaupapa Māori research and this is step by step through it. What I found out with kaupapa Māori research is that, it's your interpretation of how to integrate kaupapa Māori research into your project and the values of to guide what you're doing. So it became really clear that it was important for me to develop up a framework for how I was going to approach the research. And somebody quite wise said to me, Zoe, if you're going to connect two things together, you've got to be really clear about what the connections are. So when I talked about kaupapa Māori methodology, and then I tried to tack on constructivist grounded theory, as I said before, constructivist grounded theory just took over. It just took over really quickly because there was a lot written about it and it was easy to do and follow. Whereas kaupapa Māori methodology was about actually having to sit with it and think, okay, so in order to do this, to do justice to this, and to actually ensure that I'm actually upholding the values in kaupapa Māori methodology, what does that look like? So that's why I came up with this framework here. I won't go too much into detail around it, but I interviewed 35 participants. That was a combination of interviews and focus groups, and a combination of individual and whānau interviews as well. And really the approach centered around the four concepts, which were these four concepts here, which were whakawhanaungatanga, so the idea of connections and relationship building. Wairoatanga, so the notion of kind of spirituality, but the kind of it's been defined also as this principle of cultural integration that holds all things together over time. And I love that definition, because to me that's what you're doing when you're doing this piece of research that's contributing to something that could change things in the future. Manaakitanga, so meaning that the door's always open, looking after each other, that about being non-judgmental, I guess, but also linking to the concept of respect and holding people in unconditional positive regard, and of course reciprocity and what have you, with Kai and people being heard and having a chance to share their stories, and kaitiakitanga, so about ensuring that whānau that shared their information with me felt safe in doing that, and that what I'm doing is trying to make a difference to the world, trying to make it a better place, rather than I'm not doing it just to get the doctor in front of my name, or to be some sort of grandstanding person. It's about taking what I've been given seriously and trying to turn that into something that actually really makes positive change. So this is what I found out. Jump straight into that. So this is the research really generated a theory. So I did those sort of 35. Well, no, I did some interviews, and then I kind of drilled down on subsequent interviews about some of the ideas that were being constructed. So there were three real categories that came out of the research. One was doing to whānau, one was diminishing whānau mana, and one was getting what whānau need. And what the theory of what kind of was happening for whānau experiencing Well Child Tamariki Order services was that they felt like the services coming into their space. So that they felt that people were coming into their space and they hadn't kind of negotiated that entry. They just felt like they were entitled to. Then they felt that they were left out of the loop. So decision making was often, decisions were made without them, or they felt that, people were writing down notes and they didn't actually know what was being written. Just that sense of kind of, just not being entirely truthful with each other or open. And then there was this, the impact of that really was that there was a shutting down. And so that was shutting down attempts to engage with the service, that was shutting down in terms of giving short answers or answers that they thought people might want to hear from the service, from the whānau. So yeah, so and then it just starts again, this kind of loop of, you know, coming into our space, you know, feeling left out of the loop, and then that shutting down. So it just continues, and that that cycle there leads to this diminishing of whānau mana. And so that was really the experience, the impact really of the experience of being done to. Whānau felt defensive of who they are. You know, they felt like people were coming in and sharing information that completely contradicts their reality. And so if they're hitting them head on with information that contradicts what they've done, it's kind of like it makes them defensive, because they feel like they have to defend why they've decided to do that in the first place. And there isn't any of that exploration often around how they've got to that point where they're actually doing it this way. It's just hitting head on with this kind of, you know, this is how you do it. Oh, you're doing it like that? That's wrong. You're supposed to do it like this. And that defending who we are was really interesting, because it was about whakapapa as well. So it was about, you know, some of the decisions around parenting, and many of the decisions are based on how you were parented, or how your parents were parented, you know, how it comes through generations. So that idea of people coming in and telling you that that's wrong automatically puts you on the defensive. So that was a key a key sort of finding through this of the impact of kind of this doing to. And then there's that mistrusting the service. So then there's kind of like, once people feel like they're defending who they are, they start to mistrust why you're there in the first place, you know, and what kind of agenda you've got. And that wasn't, whānau weren't differentiating between services, right? So it could be that they had a negative experience with, you know, with wins, say. Everyone was kind of lumped into that kind of category, and so everyone has this responsibility to right this, really, because, you know, until we do that, you know, there is this kind of defensiveness, mistrust. And the other thing is that it actually transcends generations too, which isn't surprising, knowing, you know, what we talk about. But you know, for a lot of people, that's surprising that, you know, oh well, they haven't experienced it, but it's still it's held on to. And the third step in that second category was that avoiding contact. So that was the old, you know, Plunkett nurse knocks at the door and you do the commando crawl away from the door kind of thing, or, you know, hide from the windows kind of thing. But that's, you know, for some people, that's the reality. They don't want to see you when that's their experience. So interestingly enough, how services respond to that avoiding contact is they do more of the orange. So they do more of the doing too. It's sort of like, you're not going to avoid me, I'm going to track you down and come into your space. And so you can see kind of how this cycle is, it's sort of self-perpetuating, you know, and it's quite an issue for whānau. And when we're asking why people, you know, we can be sharing information and why there's no change, or why people don't want our free service or what have you, then this can explain some of that. The good news is that, you know, this whole research was about identifying what we can do to better support cultural responsiveness. And so what I found out was what's bad that's happening, but I also found out whānau described what could work for them. So basically the third category of getting what whānau need is that, you know, if whānau feel connected with the service and with the person providing the service, but with the service as a whole, if they feel included in the service and they see themselves being part of the service, and if they feel safe, they feel that the service is safe to approach and use, they don't feel judged, they don't feel like they don't belong, then that's whānau get what they need. And so those three steps are critical. So those three steps in that final, in that green area, they have actually formed the basis of the framework that I developed from this. How am I going for time? Someone's going to have to go ding ding when it's 10 minutes that I have to, so I don't run out of time. Okay. So I was just going to give you a couple of examples around these three categories, right? So the first one, the doing to whānau, that orange category, there was this kind of perception that well child services take over with the baby, that take ownership, and it's exacerbated by that physical assessment of the baby. I think there's a sense of a grieving of the loss of the relationship with the midwife, who many whānau perceive to be more interested in women as mothers rather than having this focus on the baby. So that was an interesting dynamic that probably could be explored further. You know, there was a positioning of well child services as the experts on growth and development of children, but it kind of disconnects that task of doing that physical assessment with the building of relationships. So this kind of like, you're coming in and you're going to tell me whether I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing, you know, already puts up a barrier to that building of relationships. And I guess that leads to relationships being built that don't engage with the needs of the whānau, and because the focus is primarily on the child and their growth and development. Yeah, so I've talked a little bit, but whakawhanautanga was huge, and I'll talk about that a bit later, but that was missing from a lot of people's experiences with well child services, and likewise, wairoatanga was missing as well. You know, we don't tend to talk about wairoatanga unless it's about whether or not somebody goes to church or not. So this idea, it's just under acknowledged, this whole idea of connection to ancestors. Yeah, there's whānau talked about being located within a network of ancestors that provided the foundations of life. But we, as well child services, we kind of truncate whānau from that, and we sort of look at what we've got here in front of us right now, and that idea that wisdom is passed through generations, and knowledge, and you know, that's just not explored. So that was key to that idea of when services kind of do things to people based on, you know, it's sort of one-dimensional. The next slide, we've got diminishing whānau mana. So that was the second category. You know, whānau described the need to provide a definition of what it is to be Māori for non-Māori. There were whānau that described having to defend their Māoriness to practitioners, and some were apologetic for not being Māori enough. And that was kind of reinforced by this kind of homogenous interpretation of what Māori values and beliefs are by a lot of practitioners. And, you know, again, this idea that, you know, there's a whole lot of values that are fundamental to whānau understandings of being Māori that have been passed down through generations. And that, you know, when health promotion and health education messaging challenges that, without that kind of acknowledgement of whakapapa, it's just seen as threatening. Yeah, health literacy was a big one too. You know, health literacy is talked about as, you know, as a problem that whānau have, and actually, you know, I've challenged that a bit and said, actually, it's not about whānau not understanding, it's about you're not talking in a way that whānau understand. So, you know, it's about shifting that kind of responsibility around health literacy. Yeah, there was when whānau felt uncomfortable with the well child service, they became quite protective of the space surrounding them. That was like the physical space in terms of, you know, not coming to appointments or not being at home, but it was also protecting their emotional and spiritual space, so that shutting down or giving minimal answers. And some whānau just resorted to lying to the nurse to avoid any further discussion. And when that happens, you know, there's a significant breakdown in the relationship. That's, you know, we know that, you know, if that's what's happening, we don't really want to be, you know, it's not going to be making the difference that we were hoping for. So, about 5 plus. 5 minutes. Okay, I'll try my best. All right.
Questions? No, leave the questions out. Screen. Okay.
Keep going. Okay, so this is the framework that I've developed as a result of this research. So basically the key things with this framework is that sits within the context of whānau. So this isn't about fitting whānau within the service. This is about fitting the service within whānau. There's 3 steps. There's the connected, included, and culturally safe, as I talked about before. Key things in the connected area, whakawhanaungatanga, people being able to understand who they are within the context of different whānau. So I think our practitioners have been, just thinking that they can just continue to do the same thing for everyone, and actually understanding that different parts of you come out when you're working with different people, right? So having that knowledge is critical to being culturally safe. The whānau wanted this concept of a professional friend. They wanted somebody that actually cared about them, but actually knows their stuff. They also are really keen to share stories and hear stories. That's key. That idea, so the next step around being included, whānau need to have a service that is flexible and responsive to what they want and need from the service, not this is what we offer, too tough if you don't like it or if it doesn't suit you. And that kind of self-determining tino rangatiratanga was part of that, being able to say this is what I want and this is how I measure whether it's good or not. And culturally safe was the 3rd step. So that's about having that respect for whānau realities, ensuring that what we're doing is addressing those power imbalances that exist in the health system, and that we are still addressing social inequities. But there is a movement away from what we've been doing in terms of our needs assessment processes. They've focused on social needs essentially, and we're not social workers, we're nurses. So, we either want to be a social service or we want to be a nursing service. And I don't mind either way what we become, but I think that we need to be clear about not over-promising and under-delivering on some of these things. So I guess what I'll take you through now quickly is that Mahi Ngātahi Aotearoa is how we're applying this framework, this research within whānau āwhina Plunkett. And we're very much in the services for all space, and we're wanting this model to underpin how our service is experienced by whānau. So it's kind of a philosophy or a model of care, I guess. So I've taken that framework and I've just taken out the specific examples for whānau Māori, because when I took them away, I kind of looked at it and I've tested it with different groups and different people, and they've said, actually, that's how I'd like to receive a service. If I was just, if I'm receiving a well child service, that's what I want to feel connected. I want to feel included, and I want it to be safe for me to access, and I don't want to feel judged. So we've done some work on that. We've identified that within the organisation, our service does not always engage relationally with whānau in culturally responsive ways that meet their needs. And how that manifests is that kaimahi don't always feel able to deliver relational practice, and whānau do not always experience the service as culturally safe and responsive. So that gives us some good places to start, really, in terms of how to implement this. So what we're doing is we are piloting, working with a team, or a couple of teams actually around the country within Plunkett, to find out what they need to do or what needs to change in order for them to be able to work consistently in this way. So what we've done initially is a bit of a desktop review. We've observed practice. We've engaged with some key people in the community. Obviously, we've had a pōwhiri and put the modi of the project in. It's sitting in Whakatane at the moment. The key areas that we've got at the moment are around how we engage with our community and what relationships we need to work in this way. We need to look at how we integrate with other services and who's doing what, and are we trying to do stuff that's not our business, and how do we refer. We need to look at our documentation and how that's been driving practice, as well as our needs assessment, again, how that leads to that judgment of whānau. We need to invest in professional cultural supervision, mentoring and debriefing processes. We don't have consistently that across the board, we need to reinvest in relational communication skills and also develop our Te Ao Māori resources and capability. It's also looking at our leadership and our team culture. Places that have great leadership have great teams, and there's a distinct difference around the country. And we also need to establish what are the ways we obtain whānau feedback? Are they working? And how do whānau want us to measure success from their perspective? So that's kind of the overview of how it's being applied. We're looking at, basically we're Q2 now. We're looking at implementing and developing these, the changes a bit further over the next quarter. And then we'll start to, the following quarter, we'll start to look at the measures and start in a second site. And then we're going to do an evaluation and look at how much it would cost to actually roll this out around the country. So that's kind of that's it. That's my final thoughts. E tau hiko e runga i oku whareki, e tau noho i toku whare, e hau kina ai toku tātou toku matapihi. Your steps on my whareki, your respect for my home opens my doors and windows. And that sums up what I wrote in 80,000 words, really, in one statement. So, yeah, kia ora. There you go. We'll win. Any questions or anything? I can't hear anything.
Can she share the presentation?
Are you willing to share the presentation with us?
Sure. Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Awesome. So I can send that out.
So I get the spellings right.
Yep.
It's really good.
Cool.
Zoe, will this be available for other well child providers?